I first began to write actually when I was, I think, probably about 7 or 8. And I used to write these, it's funny looking back on it actually, because I used to write pages and pages of terrible stories. But what impressed me about them was just the sheer length of them. And I just used to write and write and write. I would be so impressed that the more I could write, didn't matter whether it was any good or not, I was just so impressed with the amount of pages I used to write. About 7 or 8 I used to do these long stories. And I think really in some rather strange way that was a prophecy of the fact that eventually I would come to devote myself to this practice, this discipline, this art of writing. So about 7 or 8. And then after that, I think that I was always interested in writing, as a lot of young people are, adolescents, teenagers, poetry, poems, of pretty terrible quality, most of them. But there would always be the odd line, the odd image that I can say without any sort of false modesty, I thought, no, that's good, you've got some talent here. Something that I found myself to be beautiful and which inspired me to continue. And so really I think after that, after about the age of 17, 18, when one was sort of pushing out very dodgy poems, that continued through university. And then one had the misfortune to have to earn a living. And so I went on to do an awful job in local journalism, which I loathed from day one, and did it for 4 years, and all my hair dropped out around that time, as if in response to the awfulness of the job that I had to do. And around that time I met the young lady, as she then was, who was to become my traveller, my fellow traveller through life. And we were both hating our jobs, and we thought, well, we've got talent, let's prosecute it, let's use it. So we went abroad to live in Italy actually, and that was really when I began to practice the discipline that this seeming talent presented me with. I think the deep fascination of life, this extraordinarily powerful mystery that is life, with its beauty, its darkness, its sunlight, its power, one's fellow human beings, their extraordinary depth and complexity, all their incredible, irritating qualities, their well, yes, I suppose in a few cases their capacity for evil, I suppose, but also more importantly, I think for me, the extraordinary sense of life's beauty as well. The clash, I suppose, of qualities, of light and dark, of beauty and ugliness, of goodness, I suppose, and evil. And the power released by that. Life is incredibly powerful, and one has to have a response to it. For me, it's always been through words, the ability of words to embody experiences, psychological experiences, emotional experiences, spiritual perceptions, moments of despair, moments of exhilaration. Words have this uncanny ability in the right hands to embody those in such a way that we can objectify our experience, look at it, and thereby afterwards internalize it. I would humbly say that the writers who have influenced me most in my life are usually always those who combine a pronounced capacity for vivid imagery with meaning. For me, that, I suppose, initially was actually Shakespeare. I was lucky enough to have a great English teacher at school, and I remember being dragged to study King Lear and finding myself almost immediately engrossed by it. The thing about wonderful imagery is it makes profound truths very simple, or more simple to grasp. This is the nature of figurative language, which is that it enables both our emotions and our intellect to take part in the experience of meaning. So I would say Shakespeare, initially I thought, well, this guy's obviously just got everything there is to have with language. After Shakespeare, I suppose I sort of graduated to, I can't really remember how actually, but whether it was a friend of mine, my best friend at the time, who used to sort of throw books at me, and I would pick them up thinking, well, all right, oh my God, yes, this is interesting. Or whether it was by chance, I don't think it was from him actually, but it was Baudelaire, good old Charles Baudelaire, and of course Les Fleurs du Mal, the flowers of evil. Again, the imagery was so starkly beautiful, and the meaning that it spoke, this imagery, both to the mind and to the emotions, was like a direct address to one's own search for meaning. William Blake, of course, I love dearly, and still involved, I think, as any Blake lover is, in an ongoing pursuit of his mystery, his revelation. Many writers. I think they were the bedrock, the Romantics, the British Romantics, the European Romantics, Nietzsche. I adore Nietzsche. One doesn't have to agree with everything Nietzsche says to be incredibly impressed by the spirit of the man, the adventurous nature of his mind and his heart. And Nietzsche actually is a great poet, a fact which most people tend to overlook. In his philosophical books, he spoke figuratively at least as much as cerebrally, it seems to me, literarily or philosophically or logically, and especially, of course, in stuff like Zarathustra, he's terribly figurative. More than any other philosopher I know, certainly many other Western philosophers, he's a figurative writer and an inspiring man. So definitely Nietzsche. I'm leaving out tons of other writers, but the great European tradition. One can pick and choose. It's almost one is spoilt for choice actually. And I think those are the major names that would stand out. Of course, as I say, the Romantics: Coleridge, Shelley, Keats. Obviously, the genius that he was at a young age is nothing short of exceptional and extraordinary. To be writing that stuff at 23 and 24 was just evidence of reincarnated genius, I think. So those would be the sort of people who really have inspired and continue to inspire me. If I have a writing style, I suppose a writing style is really another phrase for one's emotional and intellectual temperament. If I have a style, it's one which is I suppose, at the same time as being fraught with irony, because irony is the big key in which the music of our literary age is written, I think. It's also one of verve. Again, really, I think, to me, imagery is key. I think the poet or the writer, the true artist of literature, defines himself by his ability to conjure up figurative language, images of great power and meaning, because that's what discriminates, to me at any rate, poetic language from logical language, is the image, the power, the beauty, the delineation of the meaningful image. So I would hope that at my best my writing is charged with what I would call significant imagery. And lyrical, one must be lyrical to appeal to the emotions. I think one can answer that in a reference to what T.S. Eliot said, which is that, well, disagreeing with Eliot actually, who said that it didn't matter what your beliefs were, or what your official beliefs were, as it were. As a writer, you could deal with those or not, as the case proved to be. I don't agree with that. I think that, you know, one can't help but be driven by one's beliefs. I'm not explicitly so-called a writer who deals in Buddhist truths, whatever they may be perceived to be, but insofar as they have permeated my heart and mind, they're going to come out in what I write. In direct answer, you know, I'd like my beliefs to drive my work very explicitly. But I'm in the process of discovering what those beliefs are, actually. It's not as if the Buddhist canon comes to you in a set postal delivery of a list of beliefs. You apply yourself to what you consider to be Buddhist beliefs, and you're constantly in the process of actually discovering what they are, and whether you think they need to be realigned or refined. Yes, there's certainly the question of the core Buddhist beliefs being inspiring to me. I love the principle of human enlightenment, this capacity to rid one's soul of all the dross of the usual violent human desires, and to arrive at a place where one, as it were, perceives one's own nature, one's human nature, and that of one's fellows around one, and nature itself, and the city. One perceives those in a completely clarified way, without imposing upon them the template of one's own needs and desires. I also love in Buddhism this sense of mind as being something essentially pure, and the heart as being something essentially pure, and bringing that extraordinary purity to bear upon one's perceptions. The energy inherent in that purity. Again, Buddhism, it seems to me, is an extremely vigorous religion, to use that awful R word. It's an experiential thing, Buddhism. It says, bring to bear upon your world the clarity of your aspiration and your perception. And to that extent, my beliefs drive me. And of course, I'm also driven by my failure to match those beliefs, as I think any artist is. You know, you're constantly coming up against your own inability to match your ideals, and you can make poetry of that, you can make art and literature and painting of that. Of course, that's probably a large part of the Western canon. It certainly was Les Fleurs du Mal's philosophy, which is Icarus falling from grace and conferring in that, in his perception of that fall, a kind of beauty. That, I would say, constitutes a large part of the Western tradition, actually. I think inevitably one has one's own favourites in the work that one does, because of the associations that they bring up, and perhaps the remembered environment in which one wrote them. I think of my play about Shelley and Byron called The Poets, which was put on at the Olivia Theatre at Bedales. And I love that work. It's the manner of it, the Georgian language, which is actually something I'm able to write with uncanny ease, actually. In fact, I'd probably prefer to use that language than the language of the streets today. It's got an elegance and an expressiveness I adore, and I can write it with great facility. So I love that play. I loved it because it takes part in London, a city I love, and obviously hate at other times, but and Italy, where I lived and which I love, and it was a time of enormous artistic optimism for me, I think, going back to my 30s. So the poets certainly, and I've just finished a play about Friedrich Nietzsche, actually, for my sins. He said humbly, which I love. It's a small little gem, and we're very hopeful of getting that on, certainly at Edinburgh, not this year but next year. So that's, I'm very, very fond of that play. My poetry, of course I love doing it. I hope people will like reading it when it comes out in its various forms, and do like reading it now, of course. I would say those are the main three that I look most fondly upon as sort of spiritual brothers, if you like. At the moment I'm writing a book which fascinates me more and more, actually. It's kind of a sort of I've subtitled it "The Strangest Book Ever Written," because it's a bizarre mixture of the sacred and the profane in a way. It's called Crash the Bus, and I'm writing it in cooperation with a dear friend of mine, and it's sort of a mixture of his life story and my life story fused, his insights and my insights fused. It should have that sort of not disclaimer at the front of a movie, that sort of what's that rubric they say, you know, based on a real story. Actually, it is based on a real story, but it's a sort of extraordinary fantasy as well. It's called, did I say it's called Crash the Bus? I think I did, yeah. And we're very hopeful that it will achieve a large audience and draw people in on quite an odd pretext to something much deeper and darker at times, and more sunlit than they perhaps anticipated. That will be out in all good bookshops and bad, so to speak. We hope certainly probably around the middle to end of summer. Sure, what I could do is, what might be appropriate is to read perhaps literally something hot off the press this morning. Why not? It's a part of Crash the Bus, which I mentioned earlier on. It's that part at which the central character is left by his wife and is forced to reconsider an earlier time when he actually had left her. And at that time he had left her because he had a very energetic about turn in his personality, in his character, in his whole view of life, in which suddenly his life seemed to turn around and face the other way completely, and he couldn't relate to his former self at all, and as such he had to, as it were, extract himself from his relationships and his environment to, as it were, almost recalibrate who he was. So this is apart from that particular moment in the central character's evolution, from this soon-to-be published book called Crash the Bus, and it's a chapter called Picking Up the Tab, and I'd be delighted to read it. So here we go, Picking Up the Tab. Show me the fool who doesn't like dining out. Suddenly, lord of our own table, waited upon instead of waiting, It's a vital release from our usual servile status and routine, a momentary aristocratic holiday from the daily below-stairs chore of who we are. Of course, the occasion can disappoint. If life is a series of restaurants at which we are served up experiences of varying quality and pleasure, then justice is the maitre d' who turns the tables to fit our just desserts. Being left by Alice, of course I was forced to reconsider having left her that time, a few months after the events. I can only say I hoped she viewed it in the same way as I now did, with a feeling of shock and loss, somehow modulated by a sense of inevitability. And yes, I know it's obscenely easy to say, but I had to leave that time, for her sake as much as mine, because I suddenly had nothing to offer her, and thus had in fact everything to take away. The relationship simply did not exist in its previous form. What, or rather who, might take its place was not at that time entirely clear. What was clear was that if relationships are a kind of personal possession, then I had robbed her of the person I was. But only insofar as I myself no longer had him to offer, was in fact no longer in possession of him myself. Your personality is the most important bank or credit card you'll ever own. It extends your line of credit everywhere you go throughout your day. It backs your beliefs and guarantees your feelings. When it has been stolen, it is difficult to get a fix on what to do, who to speak to, where to go, especially when you do not particularly want it back. And after the events, the terrifying truth was that I no longer believed in myself. No, worse than that. I vividly experienced myself as a fraud. In everything I did, I could plainly see my own transparency. Of course, something in me still fought for reinstatement. What was that element? Well, whoever or whatever it was, it appealed against the judgment the new me indicted, and cited various character references, but none of them stood up to scrutiny. Not one of the references held good for me. Nothing I once liked held true. The clothes in my wardrobe might as well have belonged to a clown, did belong to a clown, that went by my previous name. My favourite music was suddenly charmless. Had that ever really been one of my favourite songs? And food. Favourite dishes tasted weird. I no longer liked pasta. Indeed, all the dishes life had previously served up were suddenly off the menu. The whole dog-eared, food-smeared menu of me was superseded. Like an establishment that failed a surprise visit by unforgiving authorities without warning, the restaurant was closed with no sign of reopening. But then curiously, and somewhat fortunately, I found my appetite had also gone. Man cannot live by bread alone, they say, leaving me to wonder about the mysterious new taste of air. And there we have it, the latest chapter from Crash the Bus. Well, I'm now, tomorrow happens to be my birthday, and I'm beginning to have much more of my life behind me than I got in front. And what I'd like to do is, I think, probably just concentrate on my poetry for the next however many years I've got left. I mean, one can never be sure. I've got so much poetry that is half written because of the exigencies of life and the demands upon one's time. You know, one starts something and because you've got to get on with something else, you put it aside. Poems have this very understanding quality of accepting being put aside. Only they don't. They keep tugging at you, saying, "Oi, come on, come back!" You know. So you have to come back. You know, oh God, I've got to do that because it's good. Because you know it's good. It's got something beautiful about it. So you do it a bit more. But poetry is so demanding, and you can polish a poem trying to get it right for well, actually years. I've sort of picked up poems that I've known were not finished, and the great thing about poetry, unlike like a painting, you can rub bits out and write them again later on, sort of 10 years later, with a more evolved perception. So I would like to really put myself out to grasp, but a very vivid Provençal grass amongst the Italian crickets, to mix those two cultures, for the last 10 years of my life, and just literally be this sort of old geezer who's sort of in his private olive grove, just writing his poems, you know, and sending them out to the world. That's how I'd like to spend the next decade. Should I be so lucky as to have one, which I trust I will.